Hi everyone. I mean, it's pretty late in the afternoon, right? It's a bit weird because I have to speak about CBDC on a Bitcoin conference, which I think is by definition a disaster, right? So, but I've been asked by the organizers. I'm happy to speak about that, but I think, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? But let's make something meaningful out of that. And feel free to jump in and challenge all the assumptions and everything. I think, unfortunately or fortunately, CBDC are gonna come one way or another, whether we like it or not. And not every central banker is very excited about Bitcoin the way I am, or you are probably, right? So I decided to look at that from a bit different perspective, from how actually financial inclusion can work. Partly with CBDC. We can also issue some CBDC here live within whatever, like 5-10 minutes to show you how the technology can work. We did that with a room full of central bankers like 1 month before that, and they were not very excited because they said, well, that's not a real CBDC because you're not a central bank. I said, well, that's right, but that's how technology can work after all. Right, but before we jump into the CBDC topic, let's just briefly look why CBDC might be a good idea. So we have about $40 trillion cash in the world right now. I mean, like physical cash, banknotes, etc. And why cash is bad in the first place? I mean, I don't know how many of you actually still transact with cash. I think cash is great for many reasons, but we also have 2.5 billion unbanked people globally as well, who mostly use cash. One of the issues about cash is that it takes up to 25 billion hours of additional labor for the merchants to transact with cash, to count that, to transport that, etc., etc. It also costs about $100 billion to governments in public, in leakage in public spending and tax collection because of corruption, because of not effectiveness, etc., etc. Also, it costs about 400 billion direct costs to the financial institution. You know, the transport, we don't really care about them, but still that's the cost that occurs to those. And maybe this cost can be, or this money can be spent elsewhere better, innovating, building crypto infrastructure, hiring better bankers, educating them, I don't know. So I think this is the most important point, because if you transact in cash, you can only transact locally, right? So you literally have farmers who drive 4 hours in one direction to the market to sell a good which they could deliver just to get cash in reward, and maybe drive another 4 hours to put the cash somewhere safe, right? Also what it means that people who live in the cash-based economies can actually sell something globally, right? Because, again, they use only cash. Which also means that they also can buy something from the global market. So we have a horrendous mismarketing between on both sides, right? So those are the questions that I would like to ask you, actually, the why and the how. So why is today, if we speak about traditional banking, a physical transfer of cash can be faster and cheaper than electronic wire transfer through the bank? This is ridiculous, right? I mean, we all come from digital asset space, crypto, Bitcoin, where okay, that's fairly simple. But if you want to send a wire transfer from a developed country to a developing country, it's going to cost you a fortune. It's going to take a lot, right? And we agree that money is information of some sorts. I mean, speaking apart from cash. So why is transfer of information takes you so long, is so expensive, rather than actually picking a bag of cash and flying over? So even with the credit card payments, and that's another area that we looked into. So why it's so expensive? Like if you look at acquiring, why is paying with a card cost the merchant, and usually specifically the smaller ones, like 3%? Like, this is ridiculous. Like you basically create a database entry, right? So it's information, 3% from their turnover, right? So if a merchant, like just to give you a perspective, so if a merchant has only 10% margin and he pays 3% on the revenue, right? That means he pays 30% from his margin that he might spend somewhere else, right? Just on acquiring. I think that's too much as well. So again, those are the thoughts that we had in the process. So how would you build a process? How would you build a system, right? That should be open, inclusive. I mean, I think all of you, some of you tried to buy pizza with Bitcoin, right? Some of you succeeded, some of you failed. I tried hard for several minutes. I succeeded at the very end, but I think that's kind of my appeal to the group. We still have to build better products because unfortunately, the majority of the products that are out there are still not that inclusive, and that is needed if you want to get mass adoption. I mean, I tried for 2 minutes to scan a QR code from my wallet because it was so sunny and bright outside, which happened in some countries, fortunately, and don't in others, right? It was really hard. So, you probably know, you from Bitcoin community, know the Bolt cards, right? Maybe that's the way to go, to use Lightning. But I also think, and that's a very dangerous topic to touch in this room, I think we also have to consider other blockchains and other technologies for settlement of the payments, not just Bitcoin. I'm a big Bitcoin believer, by the way, just full disclosure, right? But there might be people who think otherwise, and I think that's okay, right? So we also have to include them and actually build across communities, across technologies, because it's about how we can deliver value in a more efficient way, right? And why do I say that you have to be inclusive? Because we still have half of the world population who makes less than $5 a day, right? So, and that's one of the reasons why there are so many unbanked in the first place, or underbanked, right? Because all those people, they're fairly just not interesting for the banks. The bank cannot really make money with those. So when you build a solution, you have to think about super cheap onboarding, you have to think about super cheap transactions, and maybe even think that, I mean, a lot of people have smartphones, but still there are a lot who don't. That's another thing, right? So if you want to be something truly global, it's really hard to change consumer habits. So when we did a few tests on something that we've developed and built, we literally tried it with a 2-year-old kid and 92-year-old grandfather, right, of mine, who had no idea about Bitcoin and blockchain, whatever, but like you still have to think about solutions that is possible for him to transact. That's another thing that I would like encourage the community to think about and to build. We still have about 1 billion people globally without ID or government-issued identity. The question is it needed? Probably not to transact, because people can transact, and that's one of the reasons why cash is still so popular. Because you don't need identity to get cash, but you need identity to open a bank account.
Which country doesn't need identity?
No, it's just in every country you have people without ID, right? For many reasons, for some reasons, right? But think about a lot of displaced persons. Think about African countries. Think about Latin America. Think about Southeast Asia. So that's more or less the global number, right? But again, if you think about building. So I'm like partly divided because I'm a lawyer by background, right? And I also ran regulated businesses, right? But I'm a big technology believer, right? So I would rather build without all that terrible world KYC and IML and all of that you don't like, me neither, right? Mostly because that's a terrible experience, right? But that's part of the problem, because you cannot onboard a person to a regulated institution without an ID, right? Or utility bill, or whatever, right? So anyway, I mean, you have to be open, right? That's another point that I would like to poke, the Bitcoin community and the crypto community in general. So if you compare the fees, the exchange fees, the brokerage fees, from crypto to fiat, I mean, a lot of companies will charge you 2%, 1%, and that's just too much, right? I think in order to be, and like, honestly, like I don't like the traditional financial finance either, but they somehow made this more cost efficient. And since we still will need fiat for some time, and we have to build more cost-efficient structures, but also digital money. When I speak about consumer habits, should bring more value than just payment, right? And then again, there might be people who might build products or solutions who are not built on Bitcoin, but maybe we should include them as well. I mean, this is something specifically about CBDCs, and when I spoke to the central bankers recently, who are all very excited about their CBDC projects, and not very excited about Bitcoin and other open protocols, right? But I think we should and can think about payment networks and solutions who can combine both. I mean, just maybe, we will succeed as a community to bring Bitcoin to each and every household, right? But maybe we also should consider that there will be others who will use different protocols, right? Or consumers will use CBDCs if the central bankers and banks will issue those. So I think one of the approaches to this is actually a payment system that combines both, right? That can combine both public and private protocols. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the messages that crypto is here to stay, hopefully. But since I'm a big believer in Bitcoin, I still think that there are other communities who might issue or want to issue their own private money of some sort. Like, for example, if I'm Bavarian Munich fan, I might want to transact in Bavarian Munich token and not in Bitcoin. Why not? Should this be allowed? Probably, right? Why not? If I want to pay with Lugano, not pay with Bitcoin, is it bad? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, so I mean that's the thing that I think we should really focus about, the quickness, of everything that we built. Yeah, I mean, focus on short achievable results, right? I think that's specifically today in the current economic environment. Solutions built like this in Lugano or others, if we can show that it can deliver value, either in additional tourism, additional projects that appear on top of the existing infrastructure, then it can get real boost, and people will actually say, hey, let's try the crypto payments out in our city, in our community, just because it gets something. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of that's one of the points, right? That if you build a CBDC, that might be important. That we have to, as an industry or as a community, we also have to think about rules, because there will be others who will bend rules, and that's fine, right? But maybe we can also think about rules, or at least behavior patterns that we want the community to have. Yeah, and then you have to take risk. So speaking about risk, I mean, shall we try something out just to like issue some CBDCs and then play around with them? I don't know. I mean, we can. It may fail or it may work, right? Felix, do you want to jump in? And do you have any questions so far on CBDCs in general? Yeah.
You mentioned combining private and public blockchains. How would that possibly ever happen? Because if you combine the two, how is it therefore public anymore if you're combining them?
Well, I mean, the consumers or the merchants, they use products, right? They barely use technologies, right? So you can build a product that can combine both public and private network in one.
But backed by the public network separately?
Not necessary. I mean, we can get very technical, but if you use elliptic curves as a signature, right, you can both sign on the Bitcoin network, but also on private Ethereum network. So literally, I mean, one of the products that we've built is a hardware wallet. It's a cold wallet, non-custodial one, right? But the wallet can hold keys both for Bitcoin and maybe for a Lugano token or whatever, a token issued in a private chain. So technically, this is perfectly feasible. And by the way, who of you knows what CBDC is? Oh, very knowledgeable. So what do you think about that? What do you think about CBDCs in general?
Nobody
Okay.
likes it.
And why, by the way? Let's.
Except the government.
Well, I mean, let's just get some impressions from the group. So why don't you like that? Like, I'm not a big fan
Who wants
either.
to come
but
forward?
yeah.
My opinion doesn't make sense. I mean, it's we already have technology and everything. It doesn't make sense that the bank delivers something which is decentralized, because they tend to be centralized. So
All right, doesn't make sense. Okay, good approach. What else?
I'm a bit afraid about the one experiment in China where
You mean where they have to set out the limit that they have to spend it?
exactly, and the value of the one that decrease to disincentivize the savings.
Yeah,
So that could be a little problem.
I agree. Okay. Any other
The
impressions?
privacy one, sure.
Yeah. Privacy. Well, privacy and blockchains is a wider topic. It's terrible in general.
CBDC is much worse than fiat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, let's get it on.
So what's your goal with this venture that you're doing?
I mean, we are more in a different space. So we are actually thinking about payment networks in general, right? We're not thinking about CBDCs, but I'm more focused on how you can deliver value or bring value across like continents and in more efficient manner. And Bitcoin is definitely one of the answers, one of the payment networks, right? But I just experienced that there are others who might be also fairly efficient in that. So I know that's a hard thing to say in a room full of Bitcoin maximalists, right? But I also see that there are other opportunities, and it's not a necessary one against each other, but it's actually how we can achieve that together, right? But I would like to pick up one more gentleman over there.
No, it was me. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I don't like CBDCs, but either we like it or not, they are going to exist. And better we get ready for it and approach it the right way, or going against it is not going to solve anything, in my opinion. We can do our work, but we need to accept it and work with it.
Okay, so there are some CBC believer in this group, apparently.
No, not saying that. I'm just saying that I don't like them, but they are going to be a reality. Central banks are working on them, and we are going to work with them.
Okay, so Felix, do you want to jump in and tell briefly about how CBDC could look like, or like? I'll just go for. But this has to change somehow. I don't know how to change this one. Anyway, so I certainly agree on the privacy aspect of that. I think this is terrible. I certainly agree on the programmability aspect of that if it falls in the wrong hands, right? But I also agree that there will be central banks who will be doing that, right? And the question is, and I don't have an answer, by the way, just being completely transparent. So the question is how we can, maybe reduce usage of cash, because cash is a cost and cash has its own limitations, right? Although I think everyone deserves to transact in cash, by the way, because in some cases I would rather probably transact in cash than even in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has also its issues with privacy and tracking. And I also have a background in blockchain forensics, so like if people speak about anonymity in Bitcoin, well, I have my point on that. So, and cash is still the most anonymous matter to transact. And I think everyone deserves a right for privacy, right? But how that could look like in terms, if there would be a central bank currency, how would you design that? Like, does anyone has an opinion here in the room? I mean, apart of all the, central banking part, but like even technically. Yeah.
I would just give up and make Bitcoin the standard.
Run against the wall. All right. Any other ideas?
Like the first scene of Terminator, but worse.
But not the one with naked Arnold, right? Okay. Any other opinions about that? So come on, guys. Let's play the central bank for a bit. I mean, they don't have the answers either, right? They're not like super smart and sophisticated. They just think they are, but they're not.
We already live in almost cashless society. So, what the CBDC could bring to our world?
Come on. Well, Felix is my CTO, by the way, so.
So maybe I'll help you guys out a little bit on this one. Of course, when people talk about CBDCs, they have a certain vision of what it is, right? And it's a loss of anonymity. It's that central banks can see every single one of your transaction. It's like a few people, like someone mentioned in the room, the limitations that they could put on the way you spend, and so on and so forth. To a certain extent, this is also true with a lot of the protocols that we have today, even on the public chains, right? So if we take any examples of ERC20 tokens, fundamentally, many of the contracts have a fundamental owner who could also limit the way you transact, who could limit the way you could spend, who could do a lot of things that we may or may not appreciate. Again, living in a cashless society is a fairly interesting thing because we all think that it's cashless and digital, but it comes with its own challenges. So, for example, I come from a banking background, and one of the biggest issues is that, believe it or not, quite a few banks have actually no idea what their real balances are. So, for example, consolidating your treasuries is actually a major challenge. The other thing that many people who do not come from the industry and are not aware of is that the interbank system itself is not very efficient. So much of it, for example, where I worked and I was responsible exactly for that transformation, was done in Excel spreadsheets. I mean, you'd have billions of dollars worth of assets and no one actually knew where they were. So the idea behind CBDCs is a little bit perhaps different than what they're sold as, which is also fairly interesting. It doesn't necessarily, so think even about the Bitcoin network, right? It only works because there's miners, because there's people who agree and who process transactions, who all raise their hand and who say, okay, this state of the chain is valid, correct? Or does anyone have a different opinion on this? I see that we're all in agreement. Good. So see, this is also an interesting exercise because we all agree to certain things and how they work. From a conceptual standpoint, the idea behind CBDCs is not to have the Federal Reserve have unlimited power and just mint them. This isn't, or at least this is the idea that a lot of companies who do work in the space are selling, but that's not how it should be. The concept that's more common, or at least the one that's more widely accepted today, even the one that I've discussed with quite a few central bankers at the conferences, was the idea that the banks themselves act as validators. Which is still the case today, right? And this is what makes it interesting. It's more about giving them a mechanism and a set of tools so all of these problems that we still have with legacy Web 2 systems sort of disappear. So we stop using Excel spreadsheets and then finding checks for $1 billion, which were supposed to be sent out a couple of days before, in the toilet. This is the problems that they're trying to solve. And that's why I'm saying it's a bit of a misconception, because even think about the Ethereum network. One of the interesting things that you will discover if you look very carefully at the map of the nodes is that, ironically, Amazon Web Services is actually the biggest Ethereum stakeholder in the world. Technically, if tomorrow Jeff Bezos decides that, hey, this is over, the experiment is done, he flips a switch and we have no network. What's also terrible is if we look at Bitcoin, due to the requirements, to the power requirements, the hardware requirements, we're also seeing an increasing centralization just in the hardware itself. So as much as in this room we'd like to believe we're decentralized, we're not. We are, in our minds, but we aren't from a practical standpoint, because, for example, a lot of miners depend specifically whether NVIDIA will ship chips. A lot of miners depend whether certain ASICs become available or not in order to stay efficient in that specific market. Sure.
I got to push back a little bit on the comparison between Bitcoin and Ethereum centralization. I don't think it's fair to actually compare Bitcoin and Ethereum as in like they're both centralized. That's not the case. It's actually orders of magnitude different when it comes to how centralized Ethereum is compared to Bitcoin. Just wanted to make that point.
So interesting point, because I agree that from an algorithm standpoint, they are very different. But if you look at where the nodes are located, who's operating them, for example, it also brings up a lot of issues, right? Because even a proof of work chain is subject to a 51% attack. But if 51% of your miners are in China, well, I would have many questions, right? Yeah. Not necessarily bad ones, but we do. But from a consensus standpoint, I fully agree with you.
But we also do agree that Bitcoin is much more decentralized.
Yeah.
Don't debate about that.
Yeah. But my point being that no matter how we try to play with this Rubik's Cube, we still end up with the same problems, ironically. And this is something that either we all have to try to solve, and this is why I'm saying that the concept of CBDCs itself, or at least there's two sides to the story. There's the side where, okay, the banks are trying to solve very real business problems that they have, and they're trying to do it with technology, versus an attempt, by certain people to sell it off as this global evil that, oh, there's going to be only one blockchain somewhere in the basement of the Federal Reserve, and they're going to be able to do all these things. Now, some countries are experimenting in that direction, and it's debatable whether these experiments are successful or not. My opinion is that they aren't, because they're not using the technology in the right way. It's not what it's meant to do. So that's pretty much all I wanted to add to that conversation. But I really do invite you to think about these things, because decentralization, I mean, when I first encountered Bitcoin, roughly 2008, 2009, it really was decentralized, right? Because anyone could spin up their own node, you could have it running on your computer, and everything made sense. And then I look at the industry, not 20 years, but how long has it been? 15 years? 13? Anyway, let's say 10 years and be done with it. And then you look at the industry now 10 years down the line, and you see that it's no longer possible for it to exist in that way, which is also fairly interesting. I can't spin up my own node. Forget about spinning up your own Ethereum node. You're done. Bitcoin will still work, but I'll probably have to buy a separate computer. I'll probably have to invest a lot of my time and effort into it. I'll probably have to change the hard drive a couple of times. I'm going to have quite a bit of costs of running it. And in the end, it stops making sense for me to do so as a consumer, not necessarily as a tech person. I can see that you have a complaint.
Just with regards to the Bitcoin node, you said that it's not possible for you to spin up a Bitcoin node?
No, it's possible. It's just that it'll take me... the effort that I'll have to put into it will be much more than the effort that I had to put into it back in 2008, where literally I download a client, wait a few hours, everything is synchronized, I'm happy, and not my entire hard drive has become storage for that node.
Right, because of the larger blockchain size.
Exactly.
Okay, but the whole reason Bitcoin went through the block wars is to keep the block size small. So it's still only about half a terabyte.
Only half a terabyte? You do realize my notebook has barely half a terabyte.
Yeah, but if you look at the block size for Ethereum, for example, like to become a validator on the Ethereum network, you need a lot of money and a lot of resources. Compared to Bitcoin, it's way easier to set up a Bitcoin node, and you can still do it today using a Raspberry Pi and a cheap SSD. Or an old computer.
There's no debate on the fact that, again, I'm not trying to compare them. This really is not the goal of what I'm trying to do. But think of it this way. You understand how to get it done. I understand how to get it done. A lot of people in this room understand how to get it done. But the point that I'm trying to make is that when it started, it really was a decentralization experiment that was accessible to everyone. Now it's become a lot less so. So you're right. For example, if you want to be a validator on the Ethereum network, you do need a lot of money. There's no debate on it. But if you want to be a full node on the Bitcoin network, okay, you don't necessarily need to put up any money or anything, but you're competing, let's say if you want to, not a validator, but a miner in this case, you will probably have to spend quite a bit of cash on hardware in order to stay competitive with respect to all the other people who are doing this.
Right, but mining is very different to running a node.
No,
so
that's that we agree.
Yep.
You were sure. I see.
Actually, what I find really interesting about what you said is that I kind of agree, but decentralization is achievable in Bitcoin, not in Ethereum. Absolutely, it has never been permission at Ethereum, but CBDCs it will never be decentrable because it's politics, you know.
But even politics, I mean, take Switzerland. Politics are fairly decentralized, right? We still undergo votes. There's still a lot of things going on. It's not like there's one authoritarian person who says, this is how we're going to run this country tomorrow. Well, sure, I'm not pretending to have all the answers.
Okay.
But the goal of CBDC, again, see, when we talk about decentralization, it's decentralization for whom? For example, you're talking about a wide decentralization where every single individual is a participant. The banks see it as a decentralization for themselves. So a decentralization among the banks, which is a different concept. There's no debate on it. But the degrees will always vary. This is sort of my point.
So maybe to add up a little bit on that, there are a few fairly interesting points that we uncovered when we spoke to central banks, just out of pure curiosity. And one of the reasons why they don't like cash anymore, right, look for alternative, which I think is a good idea to look for alternatives, right, is that cash is pretty costly to them, but also the majority of the smaller central banks in like emerging economies don't print their own money. So they engage private companies somewhere outside to print their own money. Then they have to wait 9 to 12 months for delivery of banknotes, right? Then they need to distribute that, etc., 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 right? So of course, maybe convincing all of them to use Bitcoin would be a good idea, right? They will have a lot of objections, and even Lightning, the state it is today, I think it's not yet there where it could have been. You'll probably need much more. I think how much Bitcoin is like today? Lightning Network like 5K, right? Something like that. So you'll probably need 50K for this to work properly. So the question is, how can they get away from cash, and whether we think that using a DLT-based database, right, or DLT-like database for issuing money is so much worse or so much better than the way they do it today. And also from the consumer side, because we did quite a few experiments around that, and we like to troll people in a way, right? So specifically if they consider themselves very serious. So we had this kind of campaign at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where we distributed the hardware wallets, right, around to the members of the forum. And then we wanted people to experience how crypto transactions could really work, right? But in order to do that, obviously you either need to take one of the protocols, right, a native one, or create your own token. You can create this on an open protocol, right? But then they have to have the gas and all of that, which a lot of consumers still don't get. Or we said, okay, let's just spin up our own private chain. Let's just create them something that they can use easily without any gas. And let's use the token, or let's say the technology, for the accounting purposes. Because we need to know how much people have spent at the bar, because we have to pay it in cash, right, in the Swiss francs. The bar needs to know how much people have spent, because they have to bill us, right? That's it. So I agree that decentralization is very important from the societal perspective, but there are a lot of use cases where you don't need this level of decentralization, to achieve that outcome you're looking for, right? And again, like even looking at the stable coins, I think every stable coin where you have to have the native token to pay gas for is not really suitable for retail market, because it makes it too complicated. And payments and transactions, all about convenience, right? It's about how can you do something fast, quick, and without extra hustle. So that's why, like, we follow stablecoin protocols that, for example, allow you to pay for gas in the stablecoin itself, which make total sense from the consumer perspective, right? Will Bitcoin come this way? Well, I don't know. I mean, there are issues with volatility, et cetera, et cetera. Also, like a lot of solutions that I see right now where you can pay with Bitcoin, but you instantly convert it to fiat, doesn't make sense to me either. Because this is like, why should they do this in the first place?
I agree.
Right? This is like nonsense. So, I mean, again, I don't have all the answers. I would love to have to, but let's maybe like brainstorm a bit together, because like I don't like the way it is done now. I would like this to work better, right?
I don't know, but I think that at Lugano's Plan B, the majority thinks that 1 Bitcoin is equal to 1 Bitcoin.
So what's Bitcoin at? 16,000, 19,000, I'm sorry, 20,000, okay. So yeah, equal in 1 Bitcoin. I'm not exactly sure when's the last time I had a $20,000 dinner, but but yes. Regarding Bitcoin, I mean, I see a lot of experiments in the space, right? I have a very strange opinion of the Lightning Network because it feels like building something next to Bitcoin as a bridge. Sorry?
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like trying, when you have to send your money to someone who's an accredited node or whatever they call it, and then they sort of vouch for you in the future transaction, and then they settle. I mean, that also feels like it's breaking decentralization to a certain degree.
I agree.
About what?
Sediment.
What's that?
Sediment?
Sediment?
Yeah. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, we're...
Come on, tell us more.
It's like you have your own community.
Sure.
Who's running your node.
So, see, these are great examples because that makes sense for that specific community. And it makes sense. So again, like Victor was telling you, you have different situations in life and different business needs. And for them, you have different tools. There's not one tool that can cover it all. For example, if I had to purchase property somewhere, then maybe Bitcoin makes sense because the size of the transaction will offset the fees, the pain of transferring, let's say, my fiat into Bitcoin and everything else. But if I'm trying to buy a coffee, I need a more intuitive experience. This is the angle where I'm coming from. Yes, I know you're going to criticize. Let's go.
Just on your point earlier about Lightning being a compromise or compromising decentralization.
Sure.
Wondering what you actually meant by that, because it's secured by the layer 1. So I'm just trying to figure out how you think that's decentralizing Bitcoin other than the nodes themselves.
So secured by layer 1, again, my understanding of Lightning remains fairly, I'd say, average. I can't pretend that I understand the technology completely. I understand the cryptography behind it. But it still feels to me like when you're sending, let's say, in order for me to transact on Lightning, I can't take my regular Bitcoin wallet and do it. We all agree with that. I have to transfer my money to my Lightning wallet where it goes to a specific node, which acts as a delegate, which says...
Yeah, I'll push back there even then, because it's just a regular Bitcoin transaction when you open a channel.
Yeah,
Lightning,
the deposit.
So, well, you could say it's a deposit, but it's just you can use your regular Bitcoin wallet to make a Lightning.
Right, but then I need to transact on the layer 2, and for that I'll need a separate wallet, right? Because that's how I understood.
Yeah, you'll need a Lightning wallet.
Yeah.
But you can operate freely between those two. Like there's no stopping that.
So it's secured. You're submitting an on-chain transaction. Therefore, anything you do in Lightning is secured by on-chain because those funds are on-chain funds. And if you try and cheat the system within Lightning, there's a thing called a justice transaction. You can take the entire balance of the other party. So it's hard to cheat in Lightning, if not impossible.
Again, we see this is the problem with a lot of things. In theory, there's a lot of papers that are written which show that in theory certain things are not practical, and then when they happen, quite a few people sit there and look surprised. The beauty of Bitcoin is that it has withstood the test of time. There hasn't been a single incident where there has been a vulnerability so big that the whole thing failed. This does not hold true for a lot of other protocols, and this does not hold true for a lot of other projects. So I think we can all remember the DAO fiasco where literally Vitalik Buterin came around and said, hey, I'm going to roll back history. Good decision, bad decision, I'm not here to debate it. I have no opinion. I did not hold any DAO tokens, so I was sitting there watching it with popcorn and seeing if someone's jumping out the window or not. But conceptually, the beauty of Bitcoin, and I think why I would not even try to make it into a payment method, is because people trust it. It's a way for people who have no other way to save money, who have no other way to protect themselves from inflation, from all sorts of things. It's a way for them to feel secure and actually to have that security. Everything else, you're taking your chances. No one really knows. But again, that's because Bitcoin, I think, has the largest history of all the protocols, and it has the most credibility. And that's why it has value. So does it make sense to look at it as a payment method? I don't know. But again, at 20,000 a unit and with the potential of going up, just the fees might never make sense for me to go to a coffee shop and pay for it. But at the same time, if we continue down that path, which is also an interesting point, it becomes a closed club. So again, from the banking world, I had access to what they called the weapons of mass destruction, and not for killing people, but exotic financial products which no mere mortal could access. Because they were so powerful, you could literally wipe out a company. All you had to do was sell their credit spread, and that company, no one would trust them the next day. No one would want to do business with them because their debt looked bad. It didn't mean the company was bad. So my concern is that if we're not letting other people into crypto, and all of this remains sort of a closed circle where everything starts being worth hundreds of thousands, it's not... See, they don't want to come, but why? Because we're making it complicated, because the technology is complicated, because everything is not user-friendly.
I think downloading a Bitcoin wallet is much easier than opening a bank account as a kid.
You'd be surprised. I've tried the experiment 50-50. It's, again, see, because we're used to it. It's not, we have that bias where for us downloading an app and putting it on our phone is easy. But I've had some people from the older generation ask me, is this application secure? Is this going to wipe out my phone? Am I going to lose my pictures?
Do they matter as much as kids growing up today, for example, that'll have a Bitcoin wallet before they have a bank account legally?
Maybe as let's say, well, I don't know if this works or not. But,
Okay.
Something works.
One of the parallels that I see, I don't know how many of you actually know how a credit card works on the inside, technology-wise, right? Probably not many of you. Maybe in this room, many people, but like outside, not. It still doesn't prevent people from using it, right? So I think we as a community, we always try to educate, impose, you have to learn this, understand that, but that's too much. People just the wider audience, they just want to take something and use it right away. And of course, downloading a Bitcoin wallet is not complicated, although some of them can be better in the UI, but they're getting better. But I think that's the goal that we need to achieve, without explaining, giving them something that they can use right away. And that's why one of the form factors that we looked at is the cards, right? Because everyone knows how to use a credit card or a card, right? So I think this is great. That's definitely the right direction, right? You want to say something?
It's not about the technology. It's about the user. Yeah. Okay. It's about the user experience. Okay. Everyone uses mail, but 90% doesn't know how it works, technologically talking. So right now, blockchain in general, not only Bitcoin, is a geek product. I can agree, but you know it's. Oh, I don't get it in English. È ancora presto. Yeah, it's too early. Okay, grazie. Thank you.
So too early, right? It's been again. If we take 2000,
it's too early for blockchain in general. Okay.
Yeah, we're at less than 1% global adoption, so it's the very,
yeah, but it's an
very
interesting. See, it's an interesting number because if we take as reference that the adventure starts, let's say 2010 for simplicity's sake, and it's been 10 years, you do realize that the iPhone became widely adopted within like 5 years of its launch. So we're doing a worse job than Apple. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, but also, I mean, again, although I am big believer in Bitcoin as an asset, and I also hold that's my biggest stake, you know, my personal portfolio. But like from the consumer perspective, I've seen technologies that work better for dedicated use cases, right? For payments, for example, right? So even coming back to the original topic of CBDCs, right? That we would ask to highlight. I think the reason for one of the ways to adoption could be that there will be CBDCs out there, whether we like it or not, right? And then people will still hold digital currencies or digital assets like Bitcoin and others. And if those CBDCs will make it more convenient for people to transact with those assets, right, through the apps, whatever, then we may also have an increased volume of Bitcoin, of people's savings, right? Because again, it's a great digital asset, right? That withstood the test of time, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but any questions in this regard, by the way? That's probably the plan B. We start to speak about CBDCs, but we also end up with Bitcoin, right? That's
Can I ask you a
Sure.
question? Do you see Bitcoin becoming a reserve currency anytime soon?
I say yes. I say yes because again, so you know that's the thing, and people say volatility. Volatility for payments is one thing, right? And obviously, I want to pay for coffee €3, 3 franc today, and I also want to pay for coffee €3 tomorrow. Although, well, with inflation rate, double-digit inflation rate in the eurozone, and you know, in this part of the world, it's debatable if that's going to stay the same. But if you look at equities, for example, and the way they are volatile, then Bitcoin is actually not doing that bad in this regard, right? So it's always relatively, and then, I mean, you've heard stories from Zimbabwe. I actually spoke to people who lived there and who encountered all this change. You know, they had very stable currency. Then, all of a sudden, it was not stable anymore, right? So yes, I think so. And surprisingly, specifically in Africa, including the central banks, they are very open to that, and they're actually very open, which more or less gives me hope, to support both the public and the private chains, right? Because like my point to them was, hey guys, I mean, crypto is here to stay, whether you like it or not. People will transact in Bitcoin. People will transact in stable coins. So why don't you offer, you know, if you want to regulate your own fintechs, please do so. But no CBDC ever issued nationally will, maybe apart from US dollar, but that's a different story, right, will compete with something that is US dollar-like, right, or euro-like, or whatever, Swiss franc for the reason, yeah.
What's the point of a CBDC in your mind?
For them, it's about control. For them, it's about cost saving. For them, it's about you know, engaging.
It's about accounting being clearer and less of a mess.
Yeah, I mean, but mostly it's literally cost saving on paper, right? Because, like, look, a lot of those countries, they have whatever, like 70% unbanked. So their money is not really digitally the way it is in Europe or US. So they have to deal with a lot of banknotes. Those are costly. It's difficult to bring them around. Specifically, you don't have developed infrastructure. So, like, think about rural areas. And one of the, I spoke to one of the Indian families who I think they're like the largest bottled water provider. And they told me, like, for us, it's not about crypto. For us, it's about we have a lot of coins that we need to transport through. So this is like the real challenge for them, right? And I think CBDCs can solve these issues, right? Not necessarily will, but at least can solve these issues. On the other hand, I think the wide adoption of DLT-based currencies will also lead to adoption of crypto in general, because people start to get used to that, and it can create a critical mass of people having wallets and maybe discovering other wallets, and then maybe thinking that they want to use Lightning instead of their CBDC or Bitcoin or whatever, or USDT, I don't know. Right?
People run away from CBDC.
Yeah, but that's also like kind of our approach and what we've built, because we are multi-chain. So we offer this hardware wallet, it's multi-chain. It also allows you to transact with the point of sales, right, the way you can do with traditional card. But the reason why we have not like stick to one protocol, decided for one protocol, is because I think the protocols has to do better jobs, right? They have to compete among each other. They have to become faster. They have to be more secure, more decentralized, more cheaper for the consumer, etc. Right? So I'm a big believer of competition. But that's also why I don't say, there is only one and holy, and that's it.
I agree.
Yeah.
I work for a startup that is digitalizing asset and governance on blockchain, and we use Hyperledger Fabric, that is a permissioned blockchain, but is compliant with the Italian regulation. So it's perfectly fitted.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? So I think from the approach-wise, you have to look for a solution to a problem and not trying to kind of, have a solution and then try to find problems for that, right? But there might be other opinions on that.
So if one day we wake up, we have Bitcoin as a reserve currency, we have Ethereum and other networks, we have Luga token, obviously.
Of course.
And then we
right
have
on the top.
Yes.
To the moon.
Yeah. And we have CBDCs. Where gonna the commercial banks go?
So the good question, it's highly debatable, right? Whether would they go? I think they're gonna stay, because you will still have the ones who will need the bank even to go somewhere in person. Funny thing that
even if we have CBDCs.
Of course, because again, like the central banks, they, apart from maybe the Chinese one, they're not really suitable to work with retail clients. They have very different objectives, and they're structured in a very different way. They're not commercial bank-like. So the question is, where will all these assets be stored, even like from the custody perspective, right? Which additional services will appear on top of those assets, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, they can be stored and kept within central bank, but the majority of the models that we looked into still involves the commercial bank be a part of the value chain. Whether it's good or not, it's debatable, right? But that's kind of one of the issues that countries who are thinking about CBDCs, looking into is, hey, if we do that and everything is held within the central bank, what's going to happen with the commercial banks? And they still play a crucial role in the economy because they're printing money, right? Or creating money supply, one way or another.
I'll add to that the banks aren't going to disappear for certain reasons. I mean, you also have to look at the business model of every single participant in this. And the role of banks, up to a certain extent, is to let you spend money that you don't have. I mean, it's a credit-driven business, and you will always have needs to borrow. So I don't think that they will disappear. And again, CBDCs, it's about the representation of money. It becomes, instead of being an entry in a database somewhere at a central bank account, it'll become an entry or a transaction on a permission chain, for example. But it's not really disrupting the same business models that you have. This really isn't their goal fundamentally, and it never has been.
Yeah, we've got DeFi for that, don't we?
Well, see, DeFi is still in its early stages. Maybe in 20 years, maybe in 30 years, it'll be different. But when you have to deal with the fact that people need credit, and you have to evaluate this credit and so on and so forth, it's not that simple. And who's going to be willing to take the risk? I mean, DeFi is great, but at the same time, you have to understand that the capacity to absorb risk and make payouts of a commercial bank is substantially higher than, you know, the idea of a community which is just throwing money into a contract and hoping to get paid back. They're different in essence. There are certain things, unfortunately, where if you don't have the knowledge and the know-how, you can't replace them with a decentralized alternative. Because what will happen is exactly what happens every time. You'll have the decentralized approach live for a little bit. Everyone who's not qualified enough to run this business will die out, and you'll end up with a centralized approach in the first place. It'll look decentralized, no debate on it, but it'll still be the same thing.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I looked at a lot of DeFi projects, right? And I think a lot of them are still very...
Baby steps.
Yeah, but I mean, come on. There would say, yes, it's been 10 years, right? But if you look at the innovation pace in the space, this is incredible because a lot of this, a lot of those protocols, actually all of them mostly, are open source. So you can build, on top of something that already exists and improve, right? So this community, and that's like why I'm a big believer in the space, is actually it's about the people. So this community is much more open, much more riskier, much more willing to share and co-create, because like none of us has all the answers, than a traditional community. And that was actually a pretty weird feeling when we've been invited to the CBDC conference, 1 month ago in Frankfurt. There, it's mostly driven by corporates. Right, and they're like, "Well, you're a competitor." Like, yeah, but we don't care. We don't mind. Let's have some drinks together. Let's have some fun. I mean, this is something very different from, let's say, from the crypto community, where everyone is like, "Hey, yeah, we are technically probably competitors, but hey, let's have some fun and let's discuss and let's co-create and let's find solutions." So I think people-wise or talent-wise, this is very different. Right, from what I encountered in the more corporate, enterprise world.
Well, yeah, we've got long to go.
Yeah, we have a lot to do, long to go, right? But we also think that's my point. We also have to be frank about the challenges that we face, and I think in many ways we've done a shitty job, right? As an industry, right? We could have been much better in many ways. Building products, being more cost efficient, et cetera, et cetera. Like one of the reasons when we spoke to merchants, why they don't you accept Bitcoin is, hey, it costs us a lot. So the savings, if you compare this with the credit cards, are not really there. And there is no extra benefit, right? So for them, it's like, yeah, well, we would like to try it out, but what's in for us? Right, and that's a crucial question. Yeah, but that's the point. They're in business.
Well, baby steps.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's the core value proposition, right? That's the core value proposition. I think we're almost we're at the end of the. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so thank you very much.